The grocery store had become a fixture in Clara's life. Every Tuesday and Friday morning, she pushed her cart through the same aisles, selecting the same items: whole wheat bread, 2% milk, a small assortment of vegetables. Her life had fallen into this rhythm years ago, after her divorce, and after her 2 children had moved away to start their own lives. The routine was comforting, even if it sometimes felt like the days blurred into one another. It was on one of these ordinary mornings, her list tucked neatly in her purse, that she noticed him. He was standing by the produce section, inspecting a pineapple with a look of serious concentration. Clara stopped in her tracks, pretending to search for the perfect cucumber while stealing glances at him. He looked to be in his early 30s, tall with dark, slightly messy hair and a casual confidence that felt magnetic. She couldn't pinpoint what it was about him that held her attention. A mix of energy and ease that made him stand out in the otherwise mundane atmosphere of the store. When their eyes met, she felt a jolt of surprise. He smiled warmly, a smile that made her realize she'd been staring. Embarrassed, she quickly looked away, fumbling with her grocery list. But then he spoke, his voice rich and kind. "Do you know how to pick one of these?" he asked, holding up the pineapple. Clara blinked, startled. "Oh, She paused, her mind scrambling. "It's something about the leaves, isn't it? If they pull out easily, it's ripe." He grinned, and her chest fluttered. "Good to know," he said, giving the leaves a gentle tug. "Looks like you're right." For a moment, they stood there, the air between them light but charged with an unexpected energy. She found herself laughing at his easy charm, her usually careful exterior softening. "Well," he said, placing the pineapple in his cart, "thank you for saving me from a tasteless pineapple. I owe you one." She laughed again, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in years. "I'm happy to help," she replied. As he walked away, she felt an odd ache, something she couldn't quite name. The moment had been brief, insignificant to anyone else, but to her it had been a spark. For the first time in a long while, she felt visible, seen in a way she didn't even realize she had been yearning for. That night, Clara found herself thinking about the encounter, about the way he'd looked at her, not with pity or indifference, but with genuine interest. It wasn't flirtation, she told herself. He was simply being kind, friendly. And yet, the memory of his smile lingered, warming the edges of her otherwise quiet evening. She didn't expect to see him again. People passed through her life like ships in the night, leaving only faint ripples in their wake. But something about this man, this stranger, stayed with her, leaving her quietly hopeful. Though she wasn't sure what for the next time Clara saw him, it was as though fate had stepped in to rearrange her routine. She had forgotten a bag of flour for a recipe she was determined to try and return to the store on a Saturday, a day she never shopped. There he was by the bakery section, holding a baguette like a sword, pretending to duel an invisible foe. Clara couldn't suppress a chuckle, and he turned, his face lighting up when he saw her. "Well, if it isn't the pineapple expert," he said, lowering the baguette in mock defeat. She smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. "And if it isn't the brave pineapple novice." They talked again, this time longer. She learned his name was Lucas, and he was a graphic designer who had recently moved to town for work. "What about you?" he asked, his voice genuinely curious. "What keeps you here?" It was such a simple question, but it caught Clara off guard. What did keep her here? Habit. The house her children had grown up in. She found herself admitting more than she usually would to a stranger. "I suppose I just stayed because it's familiar," she said. "After my divorce, I didn't see much reason to leave. My kids are grown, so it's just me now?" Lucas tilted his head, his brow furrowing slightly. "That must get lonely sometimes." Clara hesitated, then nodded. "It does." There was no pity in his eyes, only understanding. It made her feel seen in a way she hadn't expected, and it wasn't unpleasant, it was comforting. Their conversation flowed naturally after that, drifting from the mundane to the personal in a way that felt oddly safe. He told her about his struggles with settling into a new town, about his love for cooking and his habit of turning every meal into an experiment. She laughed when he described his attempt to make a soufflé that collapsed so dramatically it could have been a cartoon. "Maybe I should stick to something simpler," he joked. "Like toast? I could give you a few pointers," she said without thinking. I'm not bad in the kitchen. His grin widened. I might just take you up on that. Over the next few weeks, their paths seemed to cross with increasing frequency, at the grocery store, at the park, once even at the local cafe where she went to read. Each time, their conversations grew longer, the connection between them deepening. Lucas had a way of making her laugh in a way she hadn't in years. He had a natural curiosity about the world, a vibrant energy that drew her in. He asked questions about her life that no one had bothered to ask in a long time, about her hobbies, her favorite books, her dreams. Dreams. She couldn't remember the last time someone had asked her about those. In turn, she found herself looking forward to their interactions. She started taking extra care with her appearance on her grocery days, smoothing her hair, choosing her outfits with more attention than usual. It wasn't for him, she told herself. It was for her. And yet, she couldn't deny the spark of joy she felt every time she saw him. One afternoon, they sat on a bench outside the cafe, sipping coffee and watching the world go by. You know, Lucas said, his tone teasing, you're the only person in this town who's been nice to me without trying to sell me something. Clara laughed. Maybe it's because I don't have anything to sell. Not true, he said, his voice softening. You've sold me on the idea that this town might not be so bad after all. Her laughter faded as she met his gaze. There was something in his eyes, something warm and genuine, that made her heart flutter in a way she hadn't felt in years. As they said their goodbyes that day, Clara walked home with a smile that refused to fade. Lucas had brought something into her life she hadn't even realized was missing. Connection, laughter, and the quiet thrill of being truly seen. Clara hadn't intended to grow so attached to Lucas. At first, their interactions felt like an unexpected bonus to her quiet life, a sprinkling of color in an otherwise grayscale existence. But over time, she began to notice how often she thought about him. His laugh would echo in her mind while she washed dishes, his stories replaying in her head as she lay in bed at night. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when they met by chance at the park. Lucas had waved her over to a bench where he sat with a brown paper bag. Lunch, he asked, holding out a sandwich. I made extras. She hesitated for a moment before sitting beside him, her heart doing an unexpected flip. You cooked? Don't sound so surprised, he teased. I told you I'm a kitchen adventurer now. They ate together, the conversation flowing as easily as it always did. But as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm glow over his face, Clara found herself watching him more closely. He wasn't just charming, he was kind. He listened to her with an intensity that made her feel important, valued. And as he laughed at his own joke, his eyes crinkling at the corners, she felt something stir deep inside her, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. At first, she pushed it aside. It was absurd, wasn't it? He was younger, much younger. Surely he didn't see her the same way she was starting to see him. And yet, the feelings persisted, unbidden and relentless. That night, as she stood in her kitchen washing the day's dishes, the weight of her emotions hit her fully. She dried her hands and leaned against the counter, staring out at the darkened garden. What was happening to her? The thought of Lucas brought warmth to her chest, but it also terrified her. She wasn't supposed to feel this way, not at her age, not about someone like him. She had spent years building a safe, predictable life, shielding herself from heartbreak and disappointment. This, whatever this was, threatened to dismantle all of it. She tried to rationalize her feelings. Perhaps it was just loneliness, the novelty of someone paying attention to her after so many years of being invisible. Or maybe it was a fleeting crush, something she could will away with enough determination. But the truth was undeniable. She cared for him, deeply. Clara sat down at her kitchen table, her hands trembling slightly. She thought of the way Lucas made her laugh, the way he seemed to truly see her, not as an older woman with a predictable life, but as a person with thoughts, dreams, and stories worth sharing. And that was what scared her most, because for the first time in years she wanted more. She wanted to know what it would feel like to hold his hand, to hear his laughter not as a friend but as something more. She wanted to risk her carefully constructed life for the chance at something extraordinary. But how could she? The world wouldn't understand. Her friends, her family, they would judge her, call her foolish. And Lucas? What if she misread his kindness for something it wasn't? What if she risked everything, only to lose him? As she sat in the quiet of her kitchen, her heart wrestled with her mind, torn between fear and longing. For the first time in years, she was standing at a crossroads, and the path forward was anything but clear. Yet deep down, she couldn't help but feel that Lucas had awakened something in her that she wasn't ready to let go of. No matter how impossible it seemed, the days that followed were a tangle of emotions for Clara. She went through her routines, grocery shopping, morning walks, quiet evenings with a book. But Lucas was always there, occupying her thoughts like an unwelcome but intoxicating guest. She felt ridiculous. She was a woman in her 50s, a mother, someone who had learned to find contentment in solitude. What business did she have developing feelings for a man so much younger? And yet, every time she tried to talk herself out of it, memories of his laughter, his kindness, his easy way of making her feel alive would surface, undoing her resolve. What made it worse was how natural their connection felt. They continued to bump into each other, at the cafe on his evening jogs, even once at a bookstore where they both reached for the same novel. "Are you following me?" he teased, holding up the book. Clara blushed but smiled. "I think you're the one following me." "Touché," he said, his grin warm and genuine. Their conversations grew deeper, more personal. Lucas told her about his family, his overbearing mother, his sister who lived overseas. He shared stories of past relationships, always brushing them off with a wry laugh and a shrug. "I guess I just haven't found the right person yet," he'd said once, his tone light but his eyes betraying a hint of vulnerability. Clara had nodded, saying little, but the admission stayed with her. As their friendship deepened, so did her internal conflict. She would spend hours replaying their interactions, dissecting every word, every glance, searching for signs that he might feel something more. But then she would chastise herself, reminding herself of the impossibility of it all. The age difference wasn't just a number, it was a chasm. Lucas was vibrant, full of potential, with his whole life ahead of him. What could she possibly offer him? And even if he did feel something for her, what would people think? Her friends, her children, how would they react? One evening, Clara found herself sitting on her bed, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She traced the lines on her face, the gray strands in her hair. She didn't hate what she saw, but she couldn't imagine Lucas looking at her the same way she looked at him. That night, sleep eluded her. She tossed and turned, caught in a storm of excitement and doubt, longing and fear. She wanted to be brave, to take a chance, but the risk felt overwhelming. What if she ruined the beautiful friendship they had? What if she misunderstood his kindness? But even amid her fears, one thought kept surfacing. Lucas had brought something back into her life that she thought she'd lost forever. Hope. It was fragile, terrifying, and exhilarating all at once. And though she tried to push it away, it refused to leave, growing stronger with every moment they spent together. By morning, Clara felt no closer to an answer, but she knew one thing for certain: Lucas had changed her. He had reminded her of what it felt like to be alive, to yearn for something more than just routine and quiet contentment. And whether she acted on it or not, she wasn't sure she could go back to the way things had been before. Clara spent the next few days caught in a delicate balancing act. She tried to keep her growing feelings for Lucas in check, but each time she saw him, the flutter in her chest betrayed her. The more time they spent together, the harder it became to convince herself that he was simply a friend. It was during one of their spontaneous cafe conversations that the idea first came to her. They had been discussing Lucas's latest kitchen experiment, an overly ambitious attempt at homemade ravioli, and she couldn't resist teasing him about it. "You need someone to supervise," she joked, sipping her tea. His eyes lit up. "Is that an offer? Because I could definitely use some help." The words came so easily, she didn't realize their significance until later. "Maybe I will," she had said with a laugh, her tone playful but her heart racing. That night, Clara stood in her kitchen, staring at her phone as though it were a ticking bomb. Should she invite him over? Was that crossing a line? She could frame it as nothing more than a casual dinner, two friends sharing a meal. But deep down she knew it meant more. The thought of having Lucas in her home thrilled her and terrified her in equal measure. It would be intimate in a way their cafe chats and park walks hadn't been. It would mean letting him into her world, her sanctuary, a step she hadn't taken with anyone in years. She walked to the dining room, glancing around with a critical eye. The space was modest but cozy, the kind of place that spoke of years of quiet living. A vase of fresh flowers sat on the table, their soft scent filling the air. Would he see it as warm and inviting, or would it highlight just how different their lives were? Her finger hovered over the call button. "It's just dinner," she whispered to herself, her voice shaky. "Nothing more." Taking a deep breath, she pressed the button. He answered almost immediately, his voice bright and cheerful. "Hey, Clara. What's up?" She hesitated, gripping the edge of the counter for support. "I was thinking, since you're always talking about your kitchen experiments, why don't you come over for dinner? I could show you how it's done properly." There was a pause, and for a brief, agonizing moment, she feared she'd made a mistake. But then he laughed. "Are you sure you're ready for that? I'm known for being a terrible sous chef." Relief washed over her, and she laughed in return. "I think I can handle it. How about Friday?" "Friday sounds perfect. I'll bring dessert. Or at least I'll try to." When the call ended, Clara set her phone down, her heart pounding. The date was set, and there was no turning back now. As the week progressed, she found herself oscillating between excitement and nerves. She planned the menu meticulously, opting for dishes that were simple yet elegant, comforting but with a touch of flair. She shopped for ingredients with unusual care, choosing the ripest tomatoes, the freshest herbs. On the morning of the dinner, she stood in front of her closet, debating over what to wear. It wasn't a date, she reminded herself, but the thought of Lucas seeing her in her home and her space made her want to put in a little extra effort. By the time the evening arrived, Clara was both exhilarated and terrified. The table was set, candles flickering softly in the dim light. As she heard the knock on the door, she took a deep breath, smoothing her dress. When she opened the door, Lucas stood there with his usual easy smile, a box of pastries in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. "Hope this counts as dessert," he said, stepping inside. Clara smiled, her nerves easing slightly at his warmth. "It's perfect," she said, closing the door behind him. As she led him into the kitchen, she couldn't help but feel that this moment, this night, was a turning point. And for the first time in a long while, she was ready to see where it would lead. Dinner was a quiet affair, the kind where every word seemed to matter. As they sat across from each other, the warmth of the candles flickering between them, Clara couldn't help but notice how easy it felt to be with him. The casual nature of the evening, the laughter, and the shared moments of discovery seemed to blur the lines of age and expectation, leaving behind only the sense of being two people enjoying each other's company. Lucas had immediately fallen into step with her in the kitchen, his easy way of helping with little things, chopping herbs, stirring sauces, making the evening feel more like an intimate collaboration than a dinner party. He wasn't fussy or intrusive. He moved with a quiet confidence, his presence reassuring, yet his youthful energy was infectious, making Clara feel more alive than she had in years. "Everything smells incredible," he said, his eyes twinkling with genuine appreciation. Clara smiled, feeling a rush of pride. "I'm glad you think so. I wanted to impress you." "Impressed?" "I'm more than impressed," he teased, his voice softening. "I'm not sure I'm worthy of this much effort." The sincerity in his words struck Clara. He didn't just want the food, the comfort. He wanted her attention, her care. It was a simple, but powerful realization, one that left her heart racing. They ate slowly, savoring the food and the conversation. It was a gentle rhythm, punctuated by moments of laughter and quiet pauses, as if they were both savoring the connection between them. After the last course, they lingered at the table, sipping wine and talking about everything and nothing. "What about you, Clara?" Lucas asked at one point, setting his glass down. "What's something you've always wanted to do, but never had the chance?" She paused, caught off guard by the question. It had been so long since anyone had asked her something like that. "I don't know," she replied softly, her eyes meeting his. "Maybe I've convinced myself that I've already done everything worth doing. Or maybe I just never stopped to ask myself." He reached across the table, his hand resting gently on hers. The touch was so simple, yet so profound. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she looked down at their hands, his warm, strong fingers wrapped around hers, her own skin cool in comparison. "I think," Lucas said quietly that sometimes the things worth doing don't have to be grand or complicated. They can be small, like taking a walk when you haven't done it in years, or sitting with someone who makes you feel like you're worth being with. Clara's heart stilled, the words hanging in the air between them like a promise. She couldn't remember the last time someone had made her feel truly seen, as though she mattered in a way that wasn't tied to being a mother or a daughter or a friend. As the evening stretched on, Clara felt the weight of the years fall away. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like a woman out of place in the world. She felt like a woman who was simply living, existing, and being, in the here and now, with someone who valued her presence as much as she valued his. The dinner ended with a shared dessert, rich, decadent chocolate mousse that Lucas insisted on making himself, and when they moved to the living room, Clara felt the space between them shrink even further. There was a subtle shift in the air, as if their connection had moved from friendly to something deeper, something unspoken. And then, when they were sitting side by side on the couch, their hands brushed again, this time lingering. Lucas turned to her, his face soft with an intensity that made Clara's heart race. "I don't want this night to end," he whispered, his voice low and filled with meaning. Clara's breath hitched in her chest. There it was, the moment that would change everything. The uncertainty, the fear, the hesitation, it all seemed to disappear in that instant. She could feel the pull between them, the undeniable chemistry that had been building since their first meeting. In that moment, Clara knew, whatever it was they shared, whatever it was that had ignited between them, was real. And the possibility of what it could become, whatever that was too powerful to ignore. For the first time in years, Clara felt the pulse of something new inside her, and it was more than she ever thought she could have again. Clara sat by the window the next morning, her mind swirling with the aftermath of the night before. The warmth of Lucas's touch still lingered on her skin, and the memory of his words echoed in her heart. But as the sunlight streamed into the room, a quiet doubt began to creep in. What had she done? She wasn't naive enough to believe that their connection was anything less than real. But as she gazed at her reflection in the glass, the weight of her years settled around her like a heavy cloak. What did it mean for a woman in her 50s to be drawn to a man nearly 2 decades younger? And what did it mean for him? She had spent so many years convinced that love, especially the kind she had once known, was something meant for the young, for the hopeful, for those with time ahead of them. But what if love wasn't bound by age, by milestones or expectations? What if it was simply a feeling, raw and pure, that connected two souls, regardless of when they met or how old they were? Her thoughts drifted back to their dinner, to the look in Lucas's eyes when he spoke of simple joys and quiet connections. He hadn't seen her as an older woman. He had seen her as Clara, vibrant, intelligent, someone who could teach him something about life in a way that no one else could. And that thought, as simple as it was, filled her with a kind of strength she hadn't known she had. It wasn't just about the physical attraction, though that was undeniable. It was about how he made her feel. Lucas made her feel seen. He made her feel desirable, but more than that, he made her feel alive in a way she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. The age difference, the societal expectations, the assumptions people might make about their relationship, none of it seemed to matter when she thought of him. Clara had spent so many years giving herself away in bits and pieces to others. Her children, her friends, even her ex-husband. She had learned to suppress her desires, to make herself small so that others could be comfortable. But Lucas had cracked that shell open, reminding her that she still had so much to offer. The truth was, Clara had been lonely. Her years of solitude had not been peaceful, but rather marked by a quiet yearning for something more. She had told herself that it was enough, that she was enough. But now, as she stood on the precipice of something new, she wasn't sure if she could go back to a life without the possibility of this connection, without the chance of real intimacy again. But the question still lingered. Could this work? Her pulse quickened as she thought of what it would mean to be with Lucas, to share not only her home but her heart. Could she be brave enough to confront the societal judgments, the whispers that would surely follow them? Could she put aside her fears and embrace a future that felt so different, so unpredictable? For the first time, Clara realized that it wasn't about age or judgment. It wasn't even about what others would think. It was about what she wanted, what they wanted, and whether they were willing to pursue it despite everything else. As she thought of Lucas, his easy smile, his light-hearted teasing, the depth she had sensed beneath his playful exterior, she felt a surge of clarity. This wasn't about throwing caution to the wind. It was about embracing a truth that she had denied for too long. Love didn't follow the rules. It didn't abide by age or circumstance. It simply existed, as pure and unstoppable as the tides. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to let herself be swept away. Her reflection softened, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Clara smiled at the woman looking back at her. The woman who was no longer afraid to live fully, to love boldly. The woman who was ready to take a chance on something real. The days that followed were a blur of anticipation, the kind of quiet anticipation that makes time seem to stretch and contract at the same time. Clara had spent so many years defining herself by the roles she played, mother, friend, caretaker, but now, for the first time in what felt like forever, she was starting to think about who she was outside of those labels. It was early evening when she heard the familiar knock at the door. Her heart fluttered, and the small tremor in her hands reminded her that, despite everything, she was still nervous. But it wasn't fear she felt, it was excitement. A feeling she hadn't allowed herself to truly experience in years. When Clara opened the door, Lucas was standing there, as effortlessly charming as ever, a bouquet of wildflowers in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. His smile, that smile that always seemed to light up the room, made her chest tighten in a way that felt both thrilling and grounding at once. "I thought these might brighten your evening," he said, his voice soft and sincere. She took the flowers from him, their bright colors almost mocking the dullness of her earlier life. "They're beautiful, thank you," she replied, unable to hide the warmth in her tone. As they moved through the evening, the same ease between them was still there, gentle laughter, shared glances, the unspoken understanding that had developed between them over the past few weeks. But this time, there was a new layer to it, a quiet acknowledgement of the uncharted territory they were about to step into together. Dinner passed in a haze of conversation and moments of connection, each one deepening the bond between them. And as the evening wore on, Clara realized that this was no longer just about them. This was about her, about the woman she was becoming. She was no longer afraid of what others might think or how society might judge them. She no longer needed their approval. What mattered was that she felt something real. By the time the night was over, they were sitting on her couch once again, the remnants of dinner still scattered on the table. But it wasn't the food or the wine that lingered in the air. It was something far more potent. A quiet promise, an understanding that whatever happened next, they would face it together. "I'm glad you're in my life, Clara," Lucas said quietly, his fingers brushing against hers. Her heart swelled, and she squeezed his hand in return, the weight of his words sinking deep into her soul. "I'm glad you're in mine," she whispered back. In that moment, Clara realized that love wasn't something that had a time limit. It didn't have to be a fleeting thing, a passing phase or a moment to be forgotten. It could be deep and enduring, even in the later chapters of life. This was just the beginning for them, and as she gazed at Lucas, her heart full of hope, Clara knew that no matter what the world thought, no matter the judgment they might face, love had no expiration date. It was simply something to be cherished, something to be lived fully, at any stage in life. With that thought, she took a deep breath and let herself believe, truly believe, that she had found something precious, something worth holding on to. The future was theirs to shape, and Clara was ready to embrace it,